The early summer morning of 2001 began with an inexplicable disturbance in a small office of the NCMEC in Washington, D.C. A bright red DNA alert suddenly flashed on the system, signaling a rare match with a missing child case from In New York, Cold Case Squad investigators held their breath as the name Noah Richardson, missing 1978, appeared on the screen, as if the past was knocking on the door after more than 2 decades of absolute silence. In a quiet town in Pennsylvania, a middle-aged man was making his morning coffee, carrying out the routines that neighbors still saw as the epitome of calm and privacy. A knock suddenly sounded at 7:14 a.m. firm, decisive, and loud enough to make the entire small house freeze for a few seconds. The officers later described how the man tilted his head, slowly set his coffee cup down on the table, his hands trembling slightly, while his eyes remained strangely calm, as if he had known all along that this moment would come sooner or later. Before we dive deeper into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love journeys to find forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. In 1978, New York entered a period of prolonged unrest. Crime rates were soaring. Scattered child abductions were causing panic throughout the city, and especially in Queens. Warnings about never take your eyes off your kids for even a second appeared regularly in local newspapers. Against that backdrop, the Richardson family still tried to give Noah, their only 7-year-old son, as normal a childhood as possible. On weekends they chose the Queens Botanical Garden as a place to relax, a space considered safer than the rest of the city: green trees, a small pond, fall displays, and simple craft stalls. Emily and Daniel Richardson took Noah for a walk along the Golden Daisy paths, both to unwind and to temporarily forget the negative news they heard every week. Noah was lively, excited by the colorful decorated stall. The boy ran a few steps ahead, but stayed within his parents' sight, sometimes turning back to proudly show off something he had just picked up. Everything was normal until Emily noticed a man standing near the children's play area longer than necessary. He wasn't with anyone, had no child beside him, and was just looking around in an unnatural way. Daniel initially didn't pay attention, thinking it was just a strange visitor. Emily still felt uneasy, but the man quickly walked in the opposite direction, temporarily easing her suspicion. When Noah spotted a wooden toy stall a few dozen steps away, the boy begged to go look. Emily hesitated, while Daniel thought it was fine as long as they kept him in sight. They agreed to let Noah go ahead, both still watching the red jacket as he slipped in among the other kids. In less than a minute, Emily turned to Daniel to ask something small, and that was the exact moment the visual gap appeared. When she turned back, the red jacket had vanished from the group of children. Emily immediately hurried to the toy stall, scanning the area. Daniel split off toward the path on the right. In the first few minutes, they still believed Noah had just run to some corner. However, with each failed search loop, anxiety escalated into panic. They shouted his name everywhere, asked anyone passing by. Some people said they saw nothing. One thought they might have seen a boy in a red jacket running toward the exit near the parking lot, but wasn't sure. Another woman vaguely remembered a man bending down to talk to a child, but couldn't recall the face or the exact time. The scattered, inconsistent accounts only added to their confusion. They kept running through every path, then back to the garden's central area, hoping to spot Noah crying somewhere, but to no avail. Emily started crying, her voice breaking from calling his name non-stop. Daniel ran almost the entire area they had walked since the start of the day, but still found no sign of Noah. When they realized more than half an hour had passed running everywhere without finding him, Emily tremblingly dialed 911, reporting that their son, 7 years old, Red Jacket, had disappeared in a crowded garden in just a few dozen seconds. As soon as Emily's 911 call was routed to the NYPD, the situation classification system immediately flagged it as a missing child, high-risk report, because the victim was under 10 and lost in a crowded public area. Within minutes, the nearest patrol unit was dispatched to the Queens Botanical Garden, while the Special Victims Division was notified to prepare personnel for the scene. When the first patrol car appeared at the main entrance, Daniel and Emily rushed over, almost speaking at the same time, trying to explain everything while crying and panicking. Seeing the couple's extreme distress, the lead officer separated them to take clearer initial statements and immediately requested additional units. Within 10 minutes, the garden was no longer a peaceful tourist spot, but the site of a small-scale yet urgent search operation. The NYPD set up a mobile command post right next to the main gate, a specialized vehicle with antennas and signal lights, where coordinators listened to reports, allocated manpower, and controlled information. The officer in charge ordered all exits sealed. Garden security was mobilized to close every secondary gate, leaving only one exit for authorities. Visitors already inside were allowed to stay where they were, but not permitted to leave until further notice. This caused confusion and some frustration among tourists, but the NYPD had no choice. Time was the deciding factor in child disappearances. Just a few minutes was enough for a child to be put in a car and driven away, and the window of opportunity would close fast. Once the area was basically contained, the first team of detectives approached Daniel and Emily for formal statements. Both had to precisely recount the timeline from when Noah separated until the moment they lost sight of him. Emily mentioned seeing the man lingering near the children's play area, the one who gave her an odd feeling, but since he walked away, she didn't think much more about it. Daniel described Noah's jacket bright red with a whale on the chest, blue jeans and small sneakers slightly worn at the toes. Identifying the clothing helped search teams spot the target more easily in a crowded area. Detectives asked the couple to clarify the direction they thought Noah had run. However, their accounts weren't perfectly consistent, since each had gone a different way when they realized he was gone. Meanwhile, other officers began canvassing witnesses. No one could pinpoint the exact moment Noah disappeared, as it happened in just a few dozen seconds. One group of visitors said they saw a boy in a red jacket run past but couldn't be sure it was Noah or another child. A middle-aged woman was certain she saw a man bend down to talk to a boy near the path by the water feature, but she couldn't remember the man's face, the exact time, or whether she saw where they went next. Such vague statements forced investigators to label them low-confidence sightings, weak, unverifiable leads. In an ideal scenario, they needed a witness who directly saw Noah being led or pulled away. But here, no one reported that. It was all just feelings or guesses. As the internal search teams deployed, the NYPD divided the garden into smaller grid sections, from pathways, exhibition areas, greenhouses, the pond, to spots with large tree canopies. One group worked with garden staff to check every bush, every display room, every restroom. Another team walked the fences, looking for signs of climbing or displaced objects. At the same time, officers at the exits checked everyone wanting to leave, even though it was controversial. However, policy in public child abductions always prioritized lockdown first, explanations later. From an investigative standpoint, three main possibilities emerged in the initial minutes. 1. Noah wandered off and was somewhere in the garden, but hidden. 2. A minor accident caused Noah to fall into a hard-to-see spot, like under dense foliage or near the pond's edge. And 3. The worst case, an abduction by a stranger. Of the three, the suspicious man Emily mentioned drew particular attention, though nothing could be concluded yet. They asked Emily for more detail: height, build, clothing, color, skin tone, hair shape, distinctive features. Emily tried to remember, but in her panic state, everything blurred. She was only certain of one thing: the man's eyes didn't look like someone just casually strolling. Investigators also asked witnesses if anyone left the garden hurriedly or carrying an unusually large bag. The information remained vague. Meanwhile, the technical team began requesting maps of the area and any surveillance camera locations from the garden. In 1978, camera systems were very limited, but some greenhouses and ticket booths had basic recording equipment. This would be a key avenue to confirm Noah's or the suspicious man's movements if they passed those points. When analyzing elapsed time from loss of sight to NYPD lockdown, only about 35. In that window, if Noah was led out on foot, through a gate, the perpetrator likely escaped before police arrived. If he used a side path or jumped a fence, the investigation would be more complicated. Investigators marked both scenarios as high risk. From the initial data, the on-scene command leaned toward abduction rather than ordinary wandering, especially given the child crime context in New York at the time. Units on site were ordered to expand the search radius around the garden, checking parking lots, nearby bus stops, and roads leading to Grand Central Parkway. One patrol car was sent to sweep the outer perimeter for suspicious vehicle. While the NYPD continued gathering information and calling in more personnel, Daniel and Emily were taken to the command post area to keep them stable and prevent them from running around interfering. Detectives reassured them that this initial phase was critical. Every minute was being used to trace Noah's direction of movement and possible external intervention. Questions: had Noah ever gone with a stranger before? Had he ever run away from his parents? Was anyone following him? Were all asked to narrow things down as quickly as possible. Once the scene was fully locked down, internal and external search teams deployed, and witness statements were initially filtered. The NYPD officially upgraded the case from lost child to high-risk missing child, suspected abduction, launching a formal investigation right there on site, while Daniel and Emily could only sit beside the command table, hands shaking violently, waiting for even the smallest sign of their 7-year-old son who had vanished in just a few short dozen seconds. The atmosphere around the command post grew thick with tension as search teams returned to the toy stall area. The place every clue pointed back to yet offered no clear answers. Officers fanned out in concentric circles, checking the smallest details: low bushes along the paths, gaps between stone benches, the pond's edge, grassy areas near the greenhouses, narrow stretches the eye could easily miss. Each team carried Noah's clothing description, ready to check every spot, even places that at first glance seemed impossible for a 7-year-old to reach. The search ran parallel to reconstructing the full final 10 minutes before Noah disappeared. Detectives asked Daniel and Emily to describe in detail every movement of their son, every time they saw the red jacket, every small crowd shift, every person who appeared and vanished around the play area. The couple was asked to sit, calm down, and together recall even the tiniest detail. From their accounts, investigators established the starting point. Noah ran to the toy stall, spun a wooden item, slipped between two other kids, then stood at the stall's edge, leaning slightly toward the path leading down to the pond. That was the last image both remembered. Combining multiple witness statements, most confirmed a boy in a red jacket in that area, but no one could pinpoint the disappearance moment or see which direction the child went. The period when no one saw Noah became the biggest key. Daniel and Emily tried to estimate the seconds they lost sight, but emotional chaos made every guess hazy. Detectives recalculated using surrounding context, crowd density, flow direction, stall position, the walking or light running speed of a 7-year-old. Results showed the visual gap likely lasted 10 to 20 seconds, just enough for Noah to step onto another path, or enough for an adult to approach, lead him away, and disappear from view without drawing attention. Pinning down the gap helped the NYPD narrow possible escape route. From the toy stall, 3 paths branched out: the tree-covered route down to the pond, the long path toward the east gate, and the entrance to the orchid greenhouse. One group of officers was tasked with walking each route at the average speed of an adult leading a child, calculating how far Noah could be taken in. The pond route yielded the most alarming result. Just a short distance was needed for an abductor to get Noah out of the garden's central area and into a low-traffic zone. The East Gate route was also rated high risk because the fence there was lower than others, and the soft terrain made climbing easier. Search teams focused on both directions. While checking the East Gate, an officer discovered a fresh half-print of an adult shoe in the damp soil right next to the fence. Nothing confirmed it was related, but it couldn't be ignored. The print was marked off and fully photographed for lab analysis. Meanwhile, the witness canvassing team moved through the garden with a preliminary sketch of the strange man Emily described. They spoke to many people, but only one garden employee remembered that before the incident, a man in a dark jacket had stood for quite a while near the play area. That man then left toward the pond. The detail matched the most suspicious route identified by investigators. As witness statements began overlapping, the NYPD compiled all data into a chronological timeline, rearranging every minute of the final 10. Each witness was cross-referenced with a specific spatial location, revealing blind spots, areas no one was looking at. These blind spots were where Noah or the perpetrator could vanish without leaving clear traces. Collecting physical evidence in the garden was difficult due to heavy foot traffic before and after the disappearance. Footprints overlapped, noise was high, random dropped items littered the ground. Still, the team persisted, checking pond edges in case Noah fell in, searching every restroom and storage room, even expanding to hidden corners where dense trees could conceal a child or abductor. To supplement the timeline, police requested any recordings from the garden's working camera. Though 1978 camera systems were very limited, even one blurry clip could confirm movement direction. Gathering this took time, but in the early phase, investigators already had enough data to map probable perpetrator route. At that point, roads leading to surrounding residential areas were also marked. Main Street, Kissena Boulevard, exits to Jewel Avenue, small parking lots near the pond. Those locations were within reach if someone left the garden 1-2 minutes after Noah vanished. Outer patrol teams were immediately deployed there. A 400-meter radius search ring around the garden was established, with temporary checkpoints to inspect departing vehicles. The atmosphere at the scene grew heavy as the final timeline took shape. Noah, last seen at the toy stall, disappeared in a 10-20 second visual gap, then no witness saw him again. Every high-risk route led out of the central area. From an investigative perspective, this was a critical moment. Either Noah wandered off extremely fast without being noticed, or someone deliberately approached and removed him from sight in an instant. The NYPD continued expanding the search and accelerating data collection, while Daniel and Emily could only wait, hoping that reconstructing every detail of those final minutes would reveal the path Noah took and open even a slim chance of bringing him home. The data obtained from quickly reconstructing the timeline was rapidly turned into concrete action on the ground as NYPD search teams began focusing more intensely on tracking physical traces along the suspicious routes. The unusual shoe print near the eastern fence became the first checkpoint. The forensic team used marking powder to fix the remaining outline on the damp soil, then photographed it and made a cast to send to the lab. The shoe print sample was compared with common sizes and sole types to determine whether it was a work boot, running shoe, or the kind of leather shoe typically worn by adult men. Though not sharp enough to serve as identifying evidence, the specialists still kept it as a piece that might match other data later. In addition to the shoe print, teams began sweeping the entire area next to the pond, since that route was judged the most feasible. The ground near the pond was quite soft and easily retained footprints, but because of the heavy visitor traffic, the surface was constantly disturbed. Even so, investigators found a 2-meter-long compression mark, evidence that a heavy object had been dragged across the grass downhill toward the pond. There was nothing to prove this was a drag mark or a child's footprint, but the specialists flagged it as unusual trace and recorded it on the scene diagram. At the same time, search units expanded checks along every segment of path leading to the east gate and the greenhouse area. At one edge of the trail, they discovered a patch of soil compressed more deeply than surrounding areas, something that typically occurs when two people stand facing each other or one person remains stationary for a long time. This compression was photographed, GPS marked, and a soil sample sealed. A small pale blue piece of paper was also found nearby, apparently torn from a pocket notepad. The scrap had no writing, but it was sealed because it might contain fingerprints or tiny fibers on its surface. In the toy counter area, the technical team found a small object that had fallen between two paving stones, a translucent plastic piece, about 3 centimeters long, seemingly part of a children's toy or torn packaging. Investigators could not immediately determine whether it was connected to Noah, but since the area was crowded, every item dropped around the time of the incident was collected. Each object was placed in an evidence bag with time, location, collector's name, and environmental conditions noted. All this evidence was immediately transferred to the NYPD forensics lab for fingerprint, hair, surface DNA, or unusual residue testing. While the technical teams remained hard at work hunting traces, the investigation unit focused on determining whether there were any tire tracks near the gate. The east gate was the most noteworthy because a short stretch of uneven ground nearby led to the auxiliary parking lot. Officers discovered 2 fairly clear sets of tire tracks in the soft soil, one pair narrow and one wider. Based on depth and width, they concluded the narrower set belonged to a compact car, while the wider set could be from a light truck or garden equipment transport vehicle. Both were photographed, measured in detail, and sent to the tire analysis unit. This information helped narrow down the types of vehicles that could have been used to remove Noah from the scene if the abductor used a car. The garden's parking lot instantly became a priority search zone. The NYPD ordered the entire lot sealed and began inspecting every vehicle. Owners had to stand beside their cars while police opened trunks, checked back seats, and even shone lights underneath chassis. Some people were annoyed, but the vast majority complied because they knew a child was missing. During the checks, technicians paid special attention to vehicles with unusually dirty floor mats, fresh mud on tires, or strange items inside the cabin. A blue sedan with mud of the same type as the soil near the east gate was flagged for deeper analysis. The owner was a middle-aged man visiting the exhibition, but investigators still cross-checked his statement against movement maps in the area. At the far corner of the parking lot, another detail drew attention. A patch of damp soil bearing a small shoe print size roughly matching a child. The print was blurred and could not be confirmed as Noah's, but the coincidence led investigators to spend extra time sweeping the area. One team began searching for small objects, such as toys, scraps of fabric, a hat, or anything that might have fallen from a child's hand. Near the grassy edge beside the parking lot, they found a tiny red fiber caught on a dry branch. No one dared conclude it came from Noah's jacket, but it was collected and sealed as significant evidence. At the same time, the old cameras at the ticket booth were removed and sent to the technical lab for tape extraction. The 1978 recording equipment was primitive and did not record continuously, but the NYPD hoped to catch a glimpse of the red jacket, or the suspect in whatever footage existed. All this data would later be cross-checked with the physical traces to connect the chain of events. Expanding the search to the parking lot painted a clearer picture. If Noah had been taken out of the garden, this was the first place the abductor had to pass through. And if a vehicle was used, that would explain the extremely rapid disappearance, with no direct eyewitnesses. The investigation team recorded every license plate, cross-referenced them with owner lists, and compiled a list of vehicles that left the lot between the time before the lockdown and when police arrived. Investigators realized that every patch of disturbed soil, every tire track, and every tiny fragment at the scene could become the key in a case where time was moving very fast. They continued expanding the perimeter, hunting for any clue that might relate to Noah, while the atmosphere at the garden shifted from confusion to tense silence. Everyone clearly felt that each trace collected now might be the last chance to follow the mysterious path of the missing boy. The physical evidence collected at the scene made the investigation team even more determined to obtain more detailed witness descriptions, especially of the strange man seen near the play area before Noah vanished. As the list of people present at the Queen's Botanical Garden during that time frame was gradually filtered, investigators began calling small groups of witnesses back to the command area for additional statements, hoping that in a calmer setting they might recall details that were missed amid the initial chaos. A young family from Flushing said they had seen a man standing with his back to the toy counter while taking their son to look at the wooden models. He was taller than average, slightly thin, with black but not long hair, wearing a dark-colored lightweight nylon jacket. They did not see him with any child, which puzzled them since that area was mainly for kids. Another witness, an elementary school teacher visiting with friends, remembered that the man had very odd movements. He kept turning his head to scan the surroundings instead of looking at the display. She could not clearly describe his face but recalled that he wore thin metal-rimmed glasses and black shoes with slightly rounded toes. These scattered memory fragments from multiple people began to fit together, forming a fairly consistent picture of a single individual. The NYPD's sketch artist unit was brought to the scene so witnesses could describe features directly to the artist. Though the image remained somewhat vague, especially since no one had seen the suspect close-up or standing still, the first composite sketch of the person of interest was completed. Male, approximately 30-40 years old. Gaunt face, high nose bridge, black hair combed flat, thin metal glasses, dark windbreaker-type jacket. Copies of the sketch were made and distributed, officers canvassing the area around the garden. They carried the picture to stores, bus stops, ticket kiosks, and even asked residents nearby whether anyone had seen a similar man in recent days. Meanwhile, another investigation team returned to headquarters to compare the composite with criminal records in Queens and neighboring areas. The potential suspect list was filtered by criteria: males age 25-45 with prior arrests for child-related offenses, complaints of suspicious behavior in parks, or any kidnapping record, even minor one. The initial sweep produced more than 30 names, including individuals previously arrested for stalking children at playgrounds, chronic vagrants repeatedly reported for disturbance, and even subjects noted for suspicious behavior in public gardens. However, Because Noah's disappearance happened so quickly in a space filled with hundreds of people, investigators had to keep narrowing the list by matching description and behavior. Roughly half were immediately eliminated because their appearance did not match the sketch: too tall, too heavy, long hair, thick beard, or no glasses. Others were ruled out due to clear alibis for that time slot, such as being at work, under mandatory probation check-in elsewhere, or appearing on camera far from the garden. A few names lingered longer on the list, most notably 3 individuals living within a 5-mile radius of the Queen's Botanical Garden. One was a landscape technician previously accused of stalking children at a public playground in Forest Hill. Another had been brought in multiple times for loitering near an elementary school without valid reason. The third had once been arrested for sexual assault, but released when the victim could not identify him. All shared some features with the sketch, but none provided a definitive match. While working through this list, the team received a new witness, a 19-year-old part-time worker at the drink stand near the west exit. He remembered that around the time of the incident, a strange man passed the stand more than once. The man kept looking toward the play area, bought nothing, said nothing, and appeared increasingly tense each time he returned. The witness described him as wearing thin glasses and walking somewhat hurriedly, matching descriptions from multiple other sources. Most importantly, the young man recalled that the last time the man turned away, he headed toward the pond area and then disappeared into the dense trees. That direction matched the feasible route the investigation team had already identified. The new information led investigators to temporarily prioritize a male suspect, Caucasian or Hispanic, 30-40 years old, thin build, wearing glasses and a dark jacket. From there, the suspect list was narrowed to about 8 individuals living or working near the garden, with a history of irregular interactions with children. Investigators visited their homes one by one, checking alibis, recent behavior, vehicle condition, and anything that might match traces found at the scene. Many were surprised when police arrived, some anxious, but by the end of the day all 8 had been cleared of direct suspicion. The first proved his alibi through family, the second appeared on camera elsewhere, the third was under home confinement, the rest had clear evidence they were not at the garden at the time. Even though suspects were successively eliminated, what the NYPD could not ignore was the coincidence between witness descriptions and the direction of movement recorded in the field. A stranger had indeed appeared near Noah multiple times and vanished exactly in the direction all traces point. This forced the team to keep the composite sketch central, while continuing to seek witnesses who might have seen the man from other locations inside the garden or at the parking lot. With time moving extremely fast, every tiny memory fragment from anyone could be the clue that would help the NYPD identify the mysterious man, now regarded as the key figure in Noah Richardson's disappearance. The gradual elimination of the initial suspect list forced the NYPD to expand the scope of the investigation, especially as the composite sketch of the mysterious man continued to match numerous scattered but consistent witness accounts of someone observing children from a distance. When leads at the scene failed to point to a specific individual, the New York Police Department decided to request assistance from the FBI, based on the nature of the case, a missing child suspected of abduction, possible transport across state lines, and a subject profile that might fit previously recorded federal offender patterns. The FBI accepted the preliminary file, and that same afternoon, dispatched a team of agents from the Behavioral Science Unit, BSU, and the Child Abduction Rapid Deployment, CARD team to Queens for direct coordination. The federal agents immediately reviewed everything the NYPD had collected: the suspect sketch, the final 10-minute timeline, physical traces near the East Gate, witness statements, and feasible escape route. The first thing they noted was the seamless pattern of behavior. The man appeared near the children's play area, for a significant period, circled multiple times, interacted with no one, and left the area right at the moment Noah vanished. This behavioral profile is typical of calculated child abduction predators, rather than impulsive offenders. The FBI assessed the subject as likely hunting a target rather than acting on opportunity. This shifted the initial NYPD direction, which had leaned toward an impulsive act due to the chaotic scene. BSU agents delved deeper. If the subject fit this model, he may have studied the garden beforehand, knew the nearest exits, knew low traffic areas, and chose the exact moment parents were distracted. Such offenders rarely flee on foot. They use a pre-positioned vehicle in the parking lot. Therefore, the FBI requested a full review of every license plate in the lot between 13:30 and 15. All remaining parking tickets, ticket booth camera footage, payment receipts, and staff reports were gathered and resequenced to identify any vehicle that left within the 5-7 minutes immediately before the garden was locked down. This review quickly revealed an anomaly. 3 vehicles left the lot within 3 minutes, just before the NYPD set up checkpoints, practically the exact moment Noah was confirmed missing. 2 of the 3 belonged to families with children and were cleared at the checkpoint itself. The third was a brown sedan that paid cash with no driver information recorded. The ticket booth attendant recalled the driver as a male wearing glasses, who said nothing beyond extending his hand for the ticket. This matched the composite sketch and raised the vehicle's priority. The FBI ordered an immediate reverse trace of the plate through ticket booth camera footage. Though the images were grainy, they enlarged frames to identify at least the first characters. An H or possibly M in the first position was noted, but nothing definitive yet. Meanwhile, the BSU team analyzed the shoe prints and the route the subject likely took. The large shoe print near the fence suggested he may have waited for some time before heading to the parking lot. If true, the subject not only planned the act but exhibited high emotional and behavioral control, a common trait among repeat child abductors. This led the FBI to the next step, checking unsolved child abduction cases in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania over the previous 5 years. Files were compiled by behavioral pattern, abductions in public places, daytime incidents, non-attention-grabbing approaches to children, and use of a vehicle for escape. 3 cases in New Jersey and 1 in Pennsylvania showed similarities. The suspect was always a male aged 30-45 who approached children by pretending to ask for directions, help, or offering something attractive. However, none had detailed physical descriptions, and all led to assault rather than long-term disappearance. The FBI marked them as limited reference. Another file from Brooklyn in 1976 described a vagrant reported multiple times for stalking children in parks. He wore a dark jacket, glasses, was thin, and often appeared on weekends. The file noted he was never arrested due to insufficient evidence, but had received multiple warnings. The investigation team checked the last registered address, but the information was old, the building demolished, and no one remembered where he went. Still, this was the first record with multiple points of similarity to the Noah suspect. The FBI flagged it as a medium priority potential suspect, not enough for full focus, but worth tracking. To strengthen the data, the FBI asked the NYPD to access New York State vehicle registration records and cross-reference brown sedans from model years 1960. Overnight, a list of over 300 vehicles was filtered by owners living within 15 miles of the Queens Botanical Garden. It was then narrowed by owner age, criminal history, and location within 48 hours of the incident. The list shrank to 17 vehicles, all requiring direct checks. The FBI proposed forming a joint federal-local task force to visit each address, note the vehicle's location, photograph tires, inspect interior condition, and take owner statement. While the analysis team continued working on camera images, card agents emphasized a critical assessment. If Noah was placed in a car and driven away in under 2 minutes, the chance the abductor was still nearby was extremely low. Offenders of this type typically drive to a transfer point 10 to 20 minutes away, then take a highway out of state. This made Grand Central Parkway, Long Island Expressway, and Whetstone Expressway the key escape routes to monitor. Coordination between the NYPD and FBI made the investigation broader, deeper, and aligned with standard protocols for high-risk child abduction. Routes, vehicles, criminal records, and behavioral traces began fitting together into a logical structure, even though the most crucial piece, the identity of the mysterious man at the play area, was still missing. The FBI continued pushing to expand the search beyond the garden and trace every suspicious vehicle, while the atmosphere at the command post grew heavy with the rapid passage of time and the narrowing window to find Noah. The appearance of the brown sedan and the behavioral pattern analyzed by the FBI forced the on-scene forces to shift to a large-scale search operation that spread across the entire area surrounding the Queens Botanical Garden. Specialized teams were mobilized in order of priority, and the full topographic map was spread out in the command post to layer the search by radius. The K-9 units were sent into the garden's central area first, starting from the exact spot where Noah was last seen. The dogs were given Noah's jacket and toys to scent, but the area had been heavily cross-contaminated by hundreds of visitors that afternoon. Handlers still tracked the canine paths and detected a faint hit leading toward the pond, matching the direction in which witnesses had seen the mysterious man leave. That direction was immediately marked red for an expanded underwater search. The ESU dive team entered the pond with search grids, guidelines and high-powered lights. The pond was shallow but had a thick murky mud bottom that reduced visibility to almost zero. They swept every square meter, checking everything on the bottom: large rocks, rotten branches, rusted cans and indistinct objects. Everything recovered was unrelated to Noah. A few noteworthy items were sealed, but after preliminary evaluation they were determined to be old trash. Meanwhile, NYPD Aviation Unit helicopters began scanning the entire garden and surrounding residential areas. Infrared cameras were activated to look for unusual heat signatures under tree canopies, residential awnings, or vacant lots. The coordination screens showed only normal heat traces from residents moving about and vehicles on major roads. No heat spot was suspicious enough to deploy ground teams. Ground search teams spread out in concentric circles, starting at 0.5 miles around the garden, then expanding to 1 and 2. High-risk locations were prioritized immediately: abandoned warehouses next to Kissena Corridor Park, little-used dead-end streets, the densely wooded area northeast of the garden, and especially the sewer system, where a single open manhole could swallow a child. ESU teams opened every manhole cover, shone lights down, and lowered members on safety lines to check every accessible nook. The black water, stifling air and slippery footing made the searches dangerous, but they were mandatory because no possibility could be ruled out. All sewer branches around the garden showed no sign that Noah had fallen or been taken down there. Door-to-door teams continued visiting every home bordering the garden. Officers carried Noah's photo and asked if anyone had seen a lost child or noticed him near their property. Many families cooperated and allowed police to check basements, sheds and backyards. A few residents were initially annoyed, but upon learning it concerned a missing child, they permitted full searches of their homes. There was no indication Noah had ever been in the residential area. Long neglected sites, public storage sheds, old garages, half-built houses were also swept. ESU forced rusted locks and lit the interiors. Thick dust, rotted wooden floors, cobwebs, and piled junk all showed the places had not been touched in months. None showed fresh signs within hours of the incident. Nearby parks were swept as well. Kissena Park, Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, and the small wooded strips along Main Street all became priority search zones. Each team carried Noah's photo and questioned everyone present about anything unusual. Some people said they heard loud vehicle horns on the road right after the disappearance, but no one saw a child. Others noted police cars rushing past but saw no lost children in the area. Parking lots around the garden were screened again, this time focusing on soil, floor mats, and undercarriages. Teams rechecked every spot already searched in the first hours, looking for additional drag marks, skid traces, or small items that might have fallen from a child's pocket. Bits of debris, fabric fibers and scraps of paper were collected and sealed, but nothing matched Noah's clothing description. When the search radius expanded to 5 miles, helicopters continued scanning open areas near highways. No unusual parked vehicles, no freshly disturbed soil, no strange objects visible from the air. The third and outermost layer, the 10-mile perimeter, revealed only normal weekend resident activity. Hundreds of officers, dozens of volunteers, 3 K-9 teams, divers, helicopters, and sewer entry teams all took part in the overnight operation. Red markers on the command post boards, noting areas cleared, multiplied, but there were no results. Not one belonging, not a scrap of red fabric, not a single clue, no sign that Noah had walked out of the garden or been taken through any of the searched zones. This cold void gradually led investigators to conclude that Noah had not left the garden on foot, and if the boy had not walked away, the only remaining possibility was that he had been placed in a vehicle and vanished within an extremely short window, a hypothesis that matched the earlier FBI behavioral analysis. The atmosphere in the command post grew heavier as every search layer returned the same result. Noah had left no trace whatsoever in the area surrounding the garden. The The intensive searches yielding no trace of Noah quickly pushed the investigation into a heavily analytical phase, where every piece of physical evidence and witness statement had to be re-examined in minute detail. All evidence collected in the garden, shoe prints near the east fence, the green paper scrap, the clear plastic fragment, red fabric fibers, soil samples, and dozens of other dropped items, was sent to the forensics lab. In the first weeks, the investigative team kept receiving lab reports, but each one carried the same message: no usable DNA, no clear fingerprints, no distinctive adherent substances that could be linked to a suspect or to Noah. Even the soil and fabric samples, examined under microscopes, contained no special markers beyond what would be expected from ordinary visitor debris. Tire tracks in the parking lot did not narrow anything down. They were too common, and lacked distinctive features to connect to the departing brown sedan. The ticket booth camera captured only a few seconds of blurry footage, insufficient to trace a license plate. The faint scent trails the canines had picked up quickly dissipated under the mixed odors of thousands of subsequent garden visitors, rendering any scent path too diluted to follow backward. The investigation rapidly became dependent on witness statements, and by that point, every significant statement had already been recorded. The FBI continued assisting by screening federal criminal records and filtering cases involving offenses in parks or public areas. But every name placed on the suspect list was eliminated due to alibis or mismatch with the described behavior. The man in the composite sketch, the only key, remained a nameless shadow. No one was identified, no one matched perfectly, no surveillance produced results. With each passing week, every lead grew cold. The team shifted to broader route analysis, checking traffic cameras near access roads from the garden to major arteries like Main Street or Kissena Boulevard. But New York in 1978 did not have the blanket traffic camera coverage of today. The few cameras that existed were mostly on private premises, and most did not retain tapes longer than a few days. Tracing the brown car became virtually impossible because the effort came too late. The chance of locating the suspect vehicle dwindled to almost nothing. Expanding the search into New Jersey and Pennsylvania records also produced no clear result. A few missing child reports from neighboring states were compared for behavioral patterns with Noah's case, but those incidents typically involved separated parents, custody disputes, or runaways. None matched the pattern of a park approach, removal in seconds, and complete disappearance. The NYPD had to face the reality that every investigative avenue was dead-ended. The core investigative team changed personnel several times due to normal rotations, making information transfer and progress tracking even more complicated. New members inherited the case, read through hundreds of pages of notes, and still found no way forward. Veteran detectives, though still haunted by the case, could not uncover anything they had not already considered. For the Richardson family, despair never eased. Daniel and Emily continually organized their own searches, printed thousands of flyers, and posted them across Queens and mailed them to schools, churches, libraries, and gas stations. They appeared on local news broadcasts, pleading for anyone who had been at the garden that day to come forward with additional information. Some calls came in, but all were either false leads or repeats of initial statements. Daniel spent nearly all his free time checking parking lots, bus stops, or any place he thought might hold a clue. Emily, in unrelenting grief, returned to the garden every week, standing in the play area where her son vanished, staring into the empty space as if Noah might reappear at any moment. The family also enlisted missing children organizations, sent the file to other states, and even wrote to hospitals asking them to check boys admitted for adoption from unknown origins. But at that time the federal missing children database was still rudimentary. Everything moved slowly and in fragments. As time passed, new reports became rarer, investigator update calls grew fewer, and the familiar phrase, "no new developments," became painfully repetitive. The NYPD continued trying for the first many months, but every report was the same: no suspect, no useful evidence, no significant progress. Finally, after nearly a year with no fresh trace, the detective division was forced to reclassify the case as unsolved missing child, long-term, meaning the file would no longer be actively worked and would only be reopened upon new information. The case was officially moved to cold case status. That notification struck the Richardson family like a body blow. To them, freezing the file did not mean Noah was no longer alive. It simply meant the system could no longer help them. They resolved to keep searching on their own, to keep sending information to charitable organizations, to keep visiting the garden on disappearance anniversaries, to keep Noah's room exactly as it was the day he left. For the NYPD, Noah Richardson's file joined hundreds of other unsolved child disappearances in the cold case archives, becoming one of the decade's deepest regrets. No one on the investigative team ever forgot this case, but they also had no new leads to pursue. Noah's disappearance slowly sank into heavy silence, as if the boy had drifted off the map of New York that day without leaving a single trace, leaving everyone clinging only to the faint hope that somewhere out there, Noah was still alive. What happened to Noah on the day he vanished was only learned many years later, when he was grown enough to recount the remaining images in his memory, fragmented but sufficient to reconstruct how the perpetrator approached and removed him from the Queen's Botanical Garden. According to his account, Noah felt no threat in the initial moment. While standing at the edge of the toy stand turning a wooden animal in his hands, he heard a low, slightly raspy male voice ask if he wanted to see something even more interesting. The man stood a few steps away, head slightly lowered, with a faint smile and eyes trying to appear friendly. Noah, in the innocence of a 7-year-old, sensed nothing unusual. The subject did not touch him immediately, but simply pointed toward a cluster of low trees beside the pond. Part of Noah's memory has the man saying something like, "You'll really like this, come look, your mom is right behind us." In a child's mind, mentioning his mother made Noah believe he was not going far. When Noah stepped toward the man, the subject maintained distance, walking half a step ahead as if guiding but still letting the boy see his face clearly. Noah remembered the man wore glasses, had a prominent nose, a dark jacket, and slightly trembling hands when pointing the way down toward the pond. The moment Noah bent to look at an object, he thinks it was a small red toy car. The subject suddenly closed in from behind. He placed one hand on the boy's shoulder, not squeezing hard, more like a friendly gesture, then said quickly, "Just this way a little, it's not far." That short sentence was enough for Noah not to react. In that instant, the subject placed his other hand on Noah's back and steered him onto the trail along the pond's edge, where tree cover blocked the view from the garden's central area. Noah said he hesitated slightly and wanted to turn back, but when he looked up, the man bent down and said, "Your mom and dad are coming, just a little farther," and the boy continued. This was the critical moment when the perpetrator exploited a young child's psychology to extend the distance from his parents long enough without triggering noticeable resistance. Once they were farther from the toy stand, the subject immediately quickened the pace. He grabbed Noah's wrist and pulled harder, dropping the earlier friendly demeanor. Noah said that was when he started to feel worried and said he wanted to go back, but the man shook his head and growled, "Hurry up, it's fine." When Noah tried to pull his hand away, the subject scooped him up in one swift, decisive motion. Noah was placed off balance over the man's shoulder, face pressed into the subject's chest, so he could not see the path ahead. In that position, the boy's weak cries were easily swallowed by the garden's noise. The escape route Noah described, though hazy, matched the FBI and NYPD assessment of the pond route. He remembered being carried through a darker section where trees were thick, hearing water splashing nearby, then the sound of quick footsteps on soft ground. The man moved very fast, as if he knew exactly which paths had the fewest people. After a few seconds, Noah felt himself being gently lowered, followed by the sound of a car door opening. Details about the vehicle are among Noah's clearest memories. The smell of old upholstery, mixed with cigarette smoke, the heavy metallic sound of the car door, and the engine starting immediately after he was placed in the back seat. Noah remembered the man did not buckle him in, only draped a jacket over his legs to block outside view. When the car began moving, Noah tried to sit up, but the subject reached back and held his head down low. The drive away from Queens Noah described more through sensation than visuals. The car made at least a few turns, then longer straight sections at higher speed. He remembered distant horn sounds, the vibration of concrete roadway, and sunlight flashing through gaps in the jacket, when the man pulled up and down when the man checked whether he was lifting his head. Those details align with the car exiting the garden via the route near Kissena Boulevard, merging onto Main Street or Jewel Avenue, then heading toward a larger artery like the Grand Central Parkway. Scattered memories indicate the car did not stop during the initial phase. Noah heard the engine running steadily, without sudden stops or conversation. That suggests the perpetrator wanted to put as much distance between himself and Queens as possible before any next action. Strong vibration underfoot led Noah to believe the car had entered a highway section, entirely consistent with the escape pattern the FBI had once analyzed for the NYPD. The first place of confinement Noah described was a small, dark, musty-smelling room. He does not remember exactly how he was brought inside. Memory is clouded by fear when the car stopped, but Noah clearly recalls stepping into the room, the door closing, and the heavy metallic sound of the lock turning, telling him he could not get out. The room had a small bed with old blankets, a single curtained window, no overhead light, only a dim yellow table lamp on a wobbly wooden shelf. Noah remembered asking the man when his parents were coming, but the subject did not answer, only set down a glass of water and told him not to open the door. One particular detail Noah still remembers is the sound of distant trains passing at regular intervals, indicating the location was near railroad tracks or a major transport corridor. Noah also heard the man's heavy footsteps pacing in the house, and occasionally another door being closed, giving the impression it was not an apartment in a residential block, but an older, detached house. In the first hours, Noah was not subjected to physical violence. The man let him drink water but did not allow access to the door or let him touch anything in the room. The subject appeared rarely, spoke briefly, then left. The long silences, train sounds, wind and isolation in that room made Noah's first memories after being taken deeply haunted. Based on the account given many years later, the initial confinement site was likely in an older residential area on the edge of Queens or near Nassau County, where railroad lines run, highways are easily accessible, and detached homes could be used for short-term captivity without drawing attention. Noah does not know how long he was there, only remembers the regular rhythm of passing trains and the low raspy voice of the man whenever he appeared at the door. And it was in that dark place that the life of a 7-year-old boy veered in a direction no one could have foreseen. Memories of the first room gradually faded as Noah recounted that one morning, the man woke him very early, pulled a coat over him to cover him completely, and carried him straight out to the car. He had no idea how he left that place. He only remembered the loud creak of the metal door opening, the sound of the lock turning, and the car rolling away again, this time on a much longer drive than before. The car's vibrations changed with the road surface, sometimes smooth, sometimes jolting hard as if on a highway, then switching to narrow concrete. Noah couldn't see anything except the darkness of the coat pulled over his head, but the smell of the car seats, the cigarette smoke and the man's hurried breathing, as he checked whether the boy was sitting still, remained etched in his memory. A long time later, when all the familiar sounds of Queens had disappeared, the car entered a quieter area, no horns, no city noise. That was when Noah was taken to Pennsylvania. The next stop was a small rural-style house, set back from any neighborhood. Noah only remembered the front door opening, new light pouring in, and a room completely different from the previous one, larger, with big windows but still empty except for a single bed and a small cabinet. A feeling of strangeness overwhelmed him when he realized he was no longer in New York. The perpetrator began setting up a new environment, a completely different story to gradually erase the boy's memories. In the first days in Pennsylvania, the man didn't talk much. Noah said his voice became steadier, less irritable, and at times he even tried to sound friendly, as if trying to replace something the boy didn't yet understand. Noah was only allowed to speak when spoken to, was not allowed near the door, and was not allowed to look outside for long. At this point the man began building the fake story, the foundation for the completely new identity the boy would have to carry for many years. According to Noah, one day the man brought into the room a small wooden box containing a few children's items, coloring books, a rubber ball, an old shirt, and some odds and ends. He said, "Your name is Evan. Evan Miller." The way he said it wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. When Noah reacted that he wasn't Evan, the man stayed silent for a long time before replying, "The old name isn't safe. You're never to mention it again." From that moment, Noah was forced to memorize every detail of the new story. Evan Miller, born in a small town, mother died when he was very young, no relatives, no school, just living with dad. Dad was. Noah could clearly remember the feeling of being forced to answer with the name Evan, even though he didn't understand why. Every time he instinctively said, "I'm Noah," The man would get angry, grab his shoulders, and repeat word for word, "Evan. You're Evan." Creating fake documents happened not long after. Noah didn't witness it directly, but he remembered the man bringing home large envelopes, some blank papers with faint printed seals, and the yellow desk lamp shining on the stiff covers he was cutting into pieces. The boy heard the steady sound of a typewriter and pages being turned for many nights. Soon after, the man gave Noah a fake student ID card and a paper with a new birth date. Even though Noah was too young to understand documents, the memory remained of the man carefully gluing his photo onto the card in a way that scared him. The house in Pennsylvania became Noah's only world for many months. The doors were always double-locked, one turn lock on the outside and a steel bolt. The windows had thick curtains that let in no more than a strip of light. Noah was only allowed out of the room when the man wanted, and then only to eat or bathe. Normal childhood activities, playing in the yard, going to school, meeting other people, completely disappeared. He was cut off from society in an absolute way. No voices from outside, no friends, no neighbor. The man began teaching Noah basic things like writing and math, but always wove the fake story into the lessons. Evan doesn't like school. Evan has no friends. Only Dad takes care of Evan. These lessons weren't for education but to reinforce the man's sole role in the boy's life, to separate him from all real memories. Noah said that during this time the man no longer got harsh every time the boy mentioned the old name. Instead he switched to a softer voice, trying to create dependence. But that only made Noah more confused because he no longer knew what was real and what was fake. Once when Noah asked about his mother, the man answered with the fabricated story that she had gone far away and couldn't come back. When he asked about his father, the man dodged, then finally said, "I'm your dad. Just remember." The repetition of these sentences went on for months, causing Noah to start mixing up real memories with the imposed ones. He absolutely prevented Noah from having any contact with neighbors or anyone nearby. When he went out he locked the room and warned Noah not to make any noise. Some days Noah waited hours listening for the sound of the car in the driveway or the key turning, just to know the man would come back. He had no sense of time, only that days passed while he saw the sun for no more than a few minutes each day. In that Pennsylvania house, Noah's real identity began to be pushed deep into the darkness, replaced by a new name and a new story. That was the starting point of a life under total control, where a 7-year-old boy was completely cut off from society and forced to live as someone else. Evan Miller, the name the perpetrator created to pull him away from the old world, from his parents, and from everything that had ever belonged to him. The atmosphere in the Pennsylvania house grew more suffocating as Noah discovered that the following days brought no change except the strict schedule the man imposed on him. Being forced to live under the name Evan Miller quickly brought a series of additional restrictions. He was homeschooled with no regular school, no teachers, only the man acting as instructor, supervisor and the one who decided everything the boy was allowed to know or not know. Noah's education followed no official curriculum. Everything was arbitrarily set by the man, from exercises writing the new name, to personal history passages, the boy had to copy exactly as dictated. If Noah wrote even one detail wrong, the man immediately corrected it and made him start over, as a way to strengthen the fake memories that were gradually replacing the real images in his mind. The study room had only a small wooden table and a bookshelf mostly filled with old books the man brought home. Noah was not allowed to choose what he wanted to read. He had to open exactly the page indicated. Whenever he asked about things he remembered, the botanical garden, his father's laughter, his mother's face, the man cut him off with a short sentence, "Evan doesn't have those memories," or "That's just your imagination." The constant repetition of this refrain made Noah's real memories grow hazy, as if they were a faint dream he wasn't even sure had ever happened. Noah's living space was shrunk to the point of suffocation. The man locked interior doors with both key locks and chains, allowing access only to certain areas, like his bedroom, the bathroom, and the kitchen at specific times. Windows always had thick curtains, sometimes bolted shut so he couldn't open them. A few times Noah tried to peek out, but the man appeared instantly, repeating the rule, "Evan doesn't stand near the window." On beautiful days, sunlight filtering through the curtains drew bright stripes on the floor, letting Noah guess the weather but bringing no sense of freedom. Interaction with the outside world was virtually zero. The man didn't allow TV, radio, or newspapers, Only a few classical music cassette tapes the boy could listen to keep his mind calm. When the man went to work or left the house, Noah was locked in his room with no clock to tell time. Some days he came back very late, leaving Noah unsure whether it was morning or night, only hearing footsteps and the key turning before the door opened. Movement was also strictly limited. Occasionally the man took Noah out, but only at night, always making him wear a hat, keep his head down, and never look at anyone. These trips were very short, sometimes just sitting in the car, while the man went into a store and came right back. Noah was not allowed to ask questions, and whenever he tried to ask where they were going, the man dodged and reminded him, "Evan doesn't need to know." This made the world beyond the four walls feel even more alien, not a place to explore but one full of danger and taboo. The way he manipulated Noah's emotions also grew more sophisticated over time. If the boy was obedient, he was given a small toy or allowed to read longer. If he asked too many questions or mentioned anything belonging to Noah, he was punished by having dinner taken away or being locked in the room longer. The combination of rewards and punishment made Noah increasingly cautious, gradually losing the ability to distinguish right from wrong, real from fake. During that period, Noah's childhood had no friends, no school, no family. Only the man in the fake story repeated every day. The prolonged isolation turned memories of New York into scattered fragments in his mind, like images seen through frosted glass that Noah could no longer reach. And as the real memories wore away while the fake ones were reinforced, the 7-year-old boy became increasingly confined within an identity that wasn't his, living a childhood controlled to the point that even every breath was monitored by the man who had taken him from Queens. The controlled rhythm of life that had lasted for years began to change as Noah grew older and entered his teenage years, because requirements for official identification gradually appeared in daily life, things the man could no longer shield him from forever. Noah noticed this when the man was forced to prepare a full Evan Miller file so the boy could be registered for the minimum required homeschooling program in Pennsylvania. Birth certificate forms, proof of residence documents, and other papers suddenly appeared, all prepared by the mayors, but when Noah looked closely, he started noticing odd things. Inconsistent signatures, dates that didn't match across documents, and especially the complete absence of any medical records from his early years. The man always forbade questions, but these contradictions made Noah feel uneasy in a way very different from the fear he had as a small child. As Noah grew, he naturally wanted to move around more, access proper curriculum materials, and do the things normal teenagers do. Every time a test had to be taken or personal information filled out, the man avoided it, filled everything himself, and never let Noah look closely. The boy could clearly sense the man was more anxious than before, something he had never seen. On the rare occasions he managed to watch TV while the man was out, Noah heard programs talking about IDs, school registration, social security numbers. He gradually understood that every citizen has clear records, medical history, school history, while he had nothing except a few scattered papers the man gave him. One day the man left a folder of documents on the table, and Noah saw a copy of a birth certificate with the name Evan Miller, and a mother's name that was completely unknown to him. What confused him even more was that the father's name line was blank, and the place of birth was faded like a many times photocopied sheet. The more he looked, the more those words felt lifeless, not like the documents of a real person. That moment was when Noah began to doubt everything he had been forced to believe for years. Combined with Noah becoming more independent in his thinking, the man started fumbling when faced with simple questions. The boy asked why they had no family photos like other families. The man said the camera was broken. He asked about relatives. The man said they didn't need to care about them. When he asked why his birthday didn't match anything he remembered, the man immediately got angry, then switched to tense silence. Every time Noah asked something outside the Evan script, the man overreacted, as if desperately trying to keep a secret door from bursting open. From the faint childhood memories, city noise, the smell of plants, someone's hand holding his in a crowded place, Noah felt something was wrong with the story he had been taught for years. Those memories hadn't disappeared despite the man's efforts to erase them. They grew clearer as Noah got older, like buried pieces fighting their way back to the surface. On the rare nighttime outings, Noah started paying closer attention to road signs, license plates, and stores they passed. He realized none of them matched anything in the hometown story the man told about Evan. Once he even asked again about the hospital where he was supposedly born, The man named a hospital that, when Noah later checked in an old phone book, didn't exist in Pennsylvania. That detail made his doubt about his real identity explode stronger than ever. Noah was no longer the easily controlled child he once was. The accumulated inconsistencies formed one huge question: who was he before he became Evan Miller? That question became haunting as he realized the contradictions in the man's story weren't just carelessness, they were signs of a secret hidden for over a decade. It was from these first doubts that Noah took the initial steps on the journey to rediscover his true identity, though he had no idea the answer would reveal a truth far greater than anything he could have imagined. The doubts about his true identity pushed Noah to find a way to verify it himself without having to ask the man anything more. While working at a small computer repair shop in town, Noah spotted an advertisement for a commercial DNA testing service, a self-administered kit that only required mailing a saliva sample and waiting a few weeks for results. What caught Noah's attention wasn't the scientific pitch, but the small print at the bottom: discover ancestry, connect with relatives, uncover non-paternity events. To most people it was just another tech product, but to Noah it felt like a door out of the fake story the man had forced him to live for over 20 years. The man had never shown Noah any verifiable medical records or birth certificate, and Noah's need for paperwork to apply for a new job became the perfect excuse. The man had no idea that behind the looking for information to complete my file line was a much bigger goal: shattering the shell of the identity the man had forced Noah to live under as Evan Miller. Noah secretly ordered a DNA kit, sent to the shop's P.O. box, a place the man never checked. When the kit arrived, Noah hid it under an old drawer and waited until late at night, the only time he was sure the man was deeply asleep. Noah collected the sample in the bathroom, sealed it in the prepaid envelope, and mailed it the next morning before work, careful to leave no trace the man might notice. The weeks of waiting that followed were the most nerve-wracking Noah had ever experienced. Every time the man asked why he seemed anxious, Noah pretended to be busy, tired from work, or short on sleep. All the while, two possible outcomes kept flashing in his mind, one confirming the man's story was true, the other proving it was all a lie. The day the results arrived by email, Noah sat in front of the screen for minutes, afraid to open the file. When he finally clicked, everything changed in an instant. The DNA company's analysis concluded there was no biological relationship whatsoever between Noah and the Miller family. Not even any ancestral match with the lineage the man had made him memorize. The markers showed Noah belonged to an entirely different genetic group from the fake one he'd been forced to accept. Even more chilling, the ancestry breakdown pointed to origins in the region Noah vaguely remembered, living in a place with green trees, crowded cities, and the sound of car horns from his earliest childhood memory. What sent a shiver down Noah's spine was the system notification: no close relatives found option, open data for missing persons matching. The small line below read, abducted child, missing child, records do not match, reported family. Noah had never imagined he could fall into that category, but in a single moment, all the scattered fragments of memory suddenly formed a coherent picture. He was not Evan Miller. He had never belonged in Pennsylvania. Not long after Noah opted to make his DNA profile available for missing persons databases, the testing company's automated system began cross-referencing it with national records. This process wasn't announced immediately, only a tiny note most users would overlook: expanded matching with NCMEC, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Noah hadn't deaded his action to go that far, he just wanted an answer. But turning on public matching had fed his DNA straight into the system used for decades-old missing child cases. Less than 48 hours later, Noah's account received an automated message: expanded analysis under review by affiliate agency. The message didn't name the organization, but Noah instantly understood his data had gone further than he expected. Someone, or some agency, was now examining his DNA in connection with unsolved missing persons cases. While Noah tried to process this, another email appeared under alerts. Your DNA shows markers consistent with a missing child case registered in the night. The signal has been forwarded to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and please be prepared for identity verification when contacted. Noah read the words over and over, feeling the strength drain from his body. The only question left in his mind was no longer who am I, but if this is true, what did he do? From that moment, the darkness that had shrouded his controlled childhood began to crack. DNA had become the first piece of evidence to challenge the entire fake life under the name Evan Miller, and the first signal sent to NCMEC, which had kept thousands of missing child files from the 1970s, including one name that had vanished for 23 years. The DNA system alert was still on the screen when Noah's data was forwarded to NCMEC, and that single automated ping triggered a chain of events the boy could never have imagined would shake a frozen New York missing child case after more than 2 decades. When NCMEC received a sample showing strong markers for a 1970s missing child, they ran it against their list of long cold cases, and the file of Noah Richardson, a 7-year-old who disappeared from Queens Botanical Garden in 1978, was immediately flagged for priority comparison. The reason was simple. The new sample was extremely rare, and the current age of Evan Miller matched exactly what Noah's age would be if he were still alive. NCMEC's lab pulled the old file from archives, photos of 7-year-old Noah, age progression sketches, published in 1995, DNA from the Richardson grandparents, and everything the NYPD cold case squad had collected in the all of it was fed into the genetic matching system, and within hours an internal report went straight to supervisors. The compatibility between Noah's DNA and the Richardsons exceeded the threshold for confirmed direct blood relation. That meant Evan Miller was Noah Richardson, the child missing for 23 years. After a second confirmation, NCMEC notified the NYPD cold case squad, the unit that had originally handled a file buried under 2 decades of dust, suddenly lit up in the system with the header match confirmed. Priority response required. The cold case Lieutenant Harris got the call early in the morning and immediately summoned the team to the Queens precinct. Veteran detectives, many too young to have worked the original case, but specialists in old files, reopened every document, witness statement, area map, and previously cleared suspect list. When they read the DNA results, the briefing room fell silent for several seconds before the atmosphere completely shifted. A case many had considered unsolvable now had stronger evidence than any lead ever uncovered. This was no longer a search. It was confirmation that their victim had survived, grown up, and was living somewhere under a fabricated identity. NYPD immediately worked with NCMEC to trace the origin of the submitted DNA sample. Using records from the commercial testing company, they quickly located the order and registered email, Evan Miller, residing in a small Pennsylvania town. Deeper checks revealed the identity. Evan Miller had no presence in any medical, school, or social security database before the 1980s. A clear red flag of a constructed identity. The thin, disconnected paper trail with no official history was exactly what NYPD needed to conclude. This was not a normal adult, but a child removed from society and given an entirely new life in the shadows. A final cross-check was done the same day using DNA from Noah's parents, the Richardsons, stored years earlier. The match was absolute. There was no doubt left. Noah Richardson, missing since June 4, 1978, was alive as Evan Miller. Shock rippled through the detective. Some who had been rookies when the case broke couldn't believe this day had come. The older ones sat quietly, as if a piece of their own lives had come back. With identity ferment, NYPD officially reopened the case. They assigned fresh personnel, rebuilt the entire 1978 timeline, and worked with NCMEC to plan contact with the person living as Evan Miller. A federal verification order was issued, and the FBI was looped in because the case involved interstate transport and decades of false identity use. Noah's file status changed from missing unnamed status to located confirmed alive, a rarity Lieutenant Harris had seen only once in years of cold case work. He told the team in the briefing, "For 23 years we didn't know where that kid was, but clearly he never stopped existing." The rest of the team said nothing, but everyone understood the truth they were about to face wasn't just finding Noah. It raised a bigger question: how could a child abducted in New York live 23 years under a fake identity in Pennsylvania without anyone noticing? And more importantly, was the person who took him in 1978 still beside him? But that was for the next step. Right now, the only certainty was that Noah Richardson was alive, and after 23 years a missing person case thought to be asleep forever had finally opened its eyes again. Once the NYPD cold case squad had absolute confirmation that Evan Miller's DNA matched Noah Richardson, the next step wasn't simply announcing a missing child found after 23 years. It was building an airtight legal framework to prove in court that Noah was the nine. Investigators had to reconstruct every detail of the old file, cross-reference it with the new DNA kit data, and Evan Miller's personal information. The first thing they did was request all original documents Noah had submitted to the testing company, shipping address, purchase transaction, payment card details. Every trace showed the Evan identity had no official existence before the 1980s. Powerful evidence of fabrication. Next, they examined the information Noah entered on the DNA registration form. New date of birth, self-reported birthplace, listed guardian, and compared it to the paperwork the suspect had created. None of it matched any government agency in Pennsylvania. No hospital recorded a birth on that date. No school or vaccination records. No valid Social Security registration. This chain of inconsistencies was something no ordinary person could produce without deliberately building an identity from scratch. NYPD noted, the Evan Miller identity only holds up inside the suspect's house. To bolster physical identification beyond DNA, they compared additional biological markers. A small scar on the left shoulder, documented in Noah's medical file at age 5, and still present on Evan, slightly drooping eyelids like his father. Final consonant pronunciation like his mother, all analyzed and found consistent with the DNA conclusion. This step was critical because before approaching the suspect, they needed absolute certainty to avoid any legal misstep. Once verification was complete, the cold case team rebuilt Noah's timeline from 1978 to the present, using new data, the suspect's residence changes, surviving Pennsylvania tax records, and travel patterns from bank card activity. These dates aligned shockingly with memories Noah had entered on the DNA form, especially the move from New York to Pennsylvania, matching the suspect's late night. This was the key piece allowing NYPD to establish that the suspect didn't just hide Noah, but transported him across state lines to better conceal the crime. With a clear timeline, NYPD partnered with the FBI, which has jurisdiction over interstate kidnapping, to prepare search warrants. Investigators gathered statements from former neighbors and anyone who had contact with the suspect in the small Pennsylvania town. Nearly all described him as extremely private, rarely speaking, constantly locking doors, and almost never letting anyone inside. No one knew a child lived there because Noah was almost never allowed outside during the day. These statements helped the FBI prove intentional isolation of the victim, an aggravating factor for prosecution. To obtain the warrants, NYPD and FBI presented the federal court with the full body of evidence: DNA results, disappearance history, identity matches, and proof the suspect created false document. Investigators pulled records of the suspect's purchases of printing supplies, unusual vehicle repairs, and payments that didn't match his reported income. Everything to show he had maintained a long-term concealment system. When the file was complete, the federal prosecutor signed search warrants for the suspect's home and an emergency arrest warrant on charges of interstate kidnapping and prolonged unlawful imprisonment. At the same time, the team prepared the approach plan, mapping entrances, assessing the likelihood the suspect was armed, and drafting procedures to guarantee Noah's absolute safety. The person they believed was still living in the house with his abductor. All these preparations happened in complete silence because NYPD wanted to ensure the suspect had no chance to flee, destroy evidence, or harm Noah. And when everything was ready, the warrants were issued to the participating units, marking the start of direct confrontation with the man who had kept Noah for 23 years under the false name Evan Miller. The search warrant was approved just in time for the federal task force and NYPD to deploy to the house where the suspect and Noah had been living. And from the moment the front door was breached, the chain of evidence hidden for more than 2 decades began to surface. While one team moved in to subdue and cuff the suspect in the living room, the other went straight inside to secure Noah, then removed him from the search area to shield him from further psychological trauma while ensuring no one could tamper with the scene. From the very first point of entry, investigators noticed the house structure had been modified multiple times. Doors with auxiliary locks, extra deadbolts installed on the outside rather than the inside, and clear signs that certain rooms had been set aside for years. This was direct evidence that the suspect had deliberately prepared a long-term confinement environment, not a momentary act. When examining Noah's old bedroom, the room where he had been locked up throughout his childhood, investigators found items that did not match the timeline of when he was supposedly brought to Pennsylvania. An old shoebox bearing the logo of a Queen's store from the late, a child's shirt with a 1977 manufacturing tag, and a small folded scrap of paper with the unfinished childlike scrawl, "No," as if a little boy had been practicing writing his own name. These objects had never appeared in the fabricated Evan Miller story, and became the first physical proof that Noah had been brought here directly from New York immediately after the abduction. In the suspect's office, the FBI uncovered obvious signs of document forgery: an old typewriter, blank birth certificate forms, obtained illegally, passport photos manually trimmed, and a folder containing the scattered pieces of information the suspect had used to build the Evan Miller identity. Investigators seized numerous failed drafts, proof he had tried and discarded multiple versions before producing the relatively valid set of fake documents he used for years. Every inconsistency in Noah's paperwork matched these drafts exactly, allowing the complete reconstruction of how the false identity had been created. Another critical piece of evidence was inside a locked basement cabinet, where the search team discovered an envelope containing faded old photographs, 3- and 4-year-old Noah, standing in a bare room with rough concrete walls, the very first confinement space he would later describe. Some pictures clearly showed the child's terror and confusion as he was photographed without understanding why, while the camera angles revealed the photographer had deliberately stayed out of reach. This series of photos not only proved long-term captivity but exposed the perpetrator's sick need for control. In addition to the photographs, the team found a handwritten notebook filled with sporadic entries spanning years. The journal contained no emotions, only schedules, dates of moves, trips to buy things for the boy, instances when he asked about his old name, had to correct him, and most tellingly, an entry from late 1978, "Cannot go back to New York, must cut all ties." Another page read, "If he remembers anything, tell him it was a dream." These lines made it clear to the NYPD just how deliberate and calculated the suspect had been. This was not impulsive behavior but a decades-long plan. Deeper in the basement, investigators located items they believed dated to the year of the kidnapping: a 1970s-style children's backpack, a pair of child-sized shoes far too small for present-day Noah, and a scribbled drawing of 2 adults holding hands with a child, details that matched the faint memories Noah had described before he began questioning his true identity. These items were carefully sealed because they could contain DNA from when Noah was still very young. Thanks to this thorough search, the FBI and NYPD not only uncovered evidence of the forgery process, but also pinpointed every location the suspect had used as confinement sites over the years. The original house in New York, he fled in haste, listed with its old address in the journal; a temporary rented room in New Jersey, recorded in 1978-1979, utility bills, and finally the Pennsylvania house where Noah spent nearly his entire childhood in isolation. These markers allowed investigators to establish interstate flight, a key element for federal kidnapping charges. By the end of the search, the volume of evidence far exceeded initial expectations: forged documents, captivity photos, 1978 belongings, and the behavioral journal, all combined to form a complete picture of a 23. With everything now in hand, the NYPD and FBI knew the case was no longer in doubt. The suspect's entire web of lies had collapsed completely. The evidence seized from the house was more than enough to force the suspect into interrogation, and when he was brought into the federal interview room, his initial demeanor was not defiance, but visible collapse, as if the facade he had maintained for over 2 decades had finally shattered. FBI and NYPD investigators conducted the first session together, placing in front of him the old photographs from the locked cabinet, copies of the journal, and the DNA confirmation linking Noah Richardson to his real family. He avoided looking at anything but small reactions. Slightly trembling hands, irregular breathing, showed he knew there was no escape. When asked to explain the Evan Miller identity, he remained silent for a long time before whispering, "I never meant to hurt him. I just couldn't lose another child." That sentence opened the confession investigators had suspected but never been certain of. He had previously lost his own biological child a few years before abducting Noah. According to his statement, the child died of a chronic illness, and the loss triggered prolonged psychological breakdown, social withdrawal, loss of impulse control, and the development of distorted thoughts about replacing the child he had lost. FBI behavioral analysts present during the interview recognized the pattern he described as that of a replacement abductor, a psychological profile in which the offender kidnaps a child not for ransom or sexual abuse, but to fill an emotional void, though the act remains a serious crime rooted in violent control. He recounted that months after his child's death, He tried to continue living normally but could not. Obsessive thoughts arose whenever he saw young families in parks, eventually leading him to Queens Botanical Garden on that fateful day, and his account matched remarkably with what Noah himself would later describe: a man standing near the water lily area, watching but not immediately threatening. When asked to describe the moment he approached Noah, he admitted waiting until the boy's father turned to check a map, then offering candy and luring him toward the side path to the parking lot. He insisted he never intended physical harm, yet the calculated nature of the subsequent 23-year confinement revealed sustained control. When pressed about the locations he took Noah after the abduction, he admitted renting a small room in New Jersey for a few weeks before moving permanently to Pennsylvania, fearing prolonged stay in New York would lead to detection. The journal entries and utility bills recovered from the house matched this timeline perfectly, reinforcing the chronology the NYPD had rebuilt. Asked why he created the Evan Miller identity, he explained he initially just wanted to let the boy live as my son, but fear of discovery forced him to build an ever tighter false narrative until he half convinced himself it was true. Investigators noted clearly, the central motive was an untreated obsession with the loss of his own child, combined with severe psychological disorder, resulting in a replacement-style kidnapping, not for revenge, not for sexual exploitation, but to pathologically fill a void in his mental life. When asked whether anyone helped forge documents or hide Noah, he denied it completely. Investigators had already reviewed financial records, bank accounts, the journal, and neighbor statements. Everything indicated he acted alone, with no contact to any organization. No suspicious money flows, no large-scale purchases from illegal sources, no secret correspondence. The FBI concluded the likelihood of accomplices was virtually zero. Throughout the interview, when asked why he never released Noah as he grew older, he lowered his head and said, "Evan needed me and I needed him." The statement was not justification but a stark illustration of the twisted psychological dependency that had kept Noah trapped in a false identity for 23 years, and mental state throughout the kidnapping and captivity, and confirming the entire crime stemmed from untreated mental breakdown, leading to the creation of a replacement child, exactly as FBI experts had previously profiled. The perpetrator's confession became the foundation for the NYPD and FBI to reconstruct Noah's entire 23-year captivity, and timeline rebuilding began as soon as investigators had gathered enough physical evidence to cross-reference with 1978 cold maps of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania were spread across tables. Every address the suspect had lived or rented was marked. Then each date was compared against scattered leads from the original investigation. The first phase, June 4, 1978, was confirmed by the confession Noah was taken from Queens Botanical Garden within minutes of separating from his father, then led through a side path to the parking lot. Tire tracks collected that year had once been deemed insufficient to follow, but now matched the make and model the suspect admitted owning. Original reports noted a witness seeing a dark sedan leaving the area at the exact time of disappearance, and the current confession finally connected that long-abandoned fragment. The second phase began just hours after the kidnapping when the suspect fled New York and took Noah to a temporary motel room in New Jersey. Utility bills from 1978-1979 found in the basement files matched the period he admitted hiding there for several weeks. This explained why the initial NYPD search found nothing. The 1978 manhunt was confined to New York and never expanded into New Jersey for lack of sufficient evidence to invoke federal jurisdiction. The faded photographs of Noah taken in that location, rough concrete walls, windows barred with wooden slats, matched perfectly the description he would give decades later. The third phase, relocation to Pennsylvania, was pieced together using address records, journal entries, and confession. One notebook page read, "Go farther. No one will look here." It was dated November 1978, the same month detectives in 1978 noted the case going cold for lack of leads. Thus, just as the investigation stalled, the suspect had settled in a small Pennsylvania town where he believed no one would question a man arriving with a young child. When analyzing the 1980s-1990s period, investigators used fragmented financial records, neighbor statements, and tax filings to confirm the suspect rarely left Pennsylvania for long and almost never took Noah out during daylight. The pattern of near-total isolation over nearly 20 years was evident: exterior locked windows and bedroom doors, no school records, and no neighbor aware a son lived in the house. This timeline aligned completely with Noah's memories of a controlled childhood. No friends, no neighbors, no street scenes, only a sealed house and unchanging rules. The NYPD also cross-checked the captivity timeline against old files to identify missed opportunity. In 1983, an anonymous tip reported seeing a boy resembling Noah in a New Jersey suburb, but it was dismissed for lack of corroboration. After rebuilding the timeline, investigators realized that was exactly when the suspect briefly passed through the area to buy supplies, matching a journal note, "Go out after dark, stay off main roads." This allowed the NYPD to reassess the suspect's calculation and evasion skill. The final segment from the mid-1990s to 2001 was established relatively easily thanks to clearer evidence. Forged documents updated in stages, photos of a grown Noah in the bedroom, and his own statements about rare nighttime outing. Everything formed a continuous chain proving Noah had never lived independently or experienced normal society. Once the entire 23 years were stitched together, the NYPD and FBI finally had the complete picture. A child taken from Queens in minutes, vanished from New York in under an hour, moved across 2 states, then confined and raised under a false identity for over 2 decades. The scattered pieces from 1978 fit together for the first time with no remaining gaps, and that seamless reconstruction became the bedrock for every subsequent legal step. Once the full 23-year timeline of captivity had been reconstructed, the NYPD and FBI's next priority was to fully restore Noah's real identity. Only by legally separating him from the name Evan Miller could the reunion and all subsequent support steps proceed. From the very first session with investigators, Noah, though still disoriented, made it clear that he wanted to know the whole truth and to escape the identity the perpetrator had forced on him. Authorities immediately began the process of erasing the false identity, a procedure far more complex than issuing new documents because it required proving that Evan Miller had never legally existed in any civil database. Evidence from the search showed that every document tied to Evan Miller was homemade and unrecognized by any government agency. This allowed the FBI to decisively wipe the record. The fake ID was seized, the fabricated social security number was invalidated, and all related data was purged from every system. After the false identity was eliminated, the next step was to re-establish Noah Richardson's true identity. A boy born in 1971, abducted at age 7, and who had received no official paperwork since. The NYPD worked with New York's Vital Records Office to retrieve the original birth certificate, performed a final DNA confirmation, then issued a complete set of new legal documents, a reissued birth certificate, a valid social security number, and a temporary state ID so Noah could use them immediately in subsequent procedures. When he was handed the birth certificate bearing the name Noah James Richardson, his real name, Noah said nothing for several minutes. The staff present said his reaction wasn't shock, it was more like someone finally seeing himself after years of being forced to live in someone else's skin. Parallel to returning his true identity, authorities compiled a specialized file to support Noah before the family reunion. The file included an initial psychological evaluation, an assessment of the long-term effects of captivity, a complete medical history, and everything Noah could recall about his early childhood. This information was not only vital for the professionals who would later treat him, but also helped the NYPD build a complete case file as it proved Noah had been completely isolated, an essential element in the federal charges of kidnapping and prolonged unlawful imprisonment. Investigators also coordinated with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, to follow the child reunification preparedness protocol typically used for victims missing for many years. Although Noah was now an adult, his case was treated as exceptional because he had been abducted as a child who understood almost nothing about the world. The reunification file included re-verifying the Richardson family's information, gathering documentation from the decades-long search, and preparing guidance for both sides to minimize psychological shock during the reunion. Every step was handled with extreme care because every expert understood that restoring an identity was not just paperwork, it was the process of returning a piece of life that had been stolen for. When all the new documents were complete and every trace of Evan Miller had been erased from every database, the file titled Noah Richardson Found Alive was officially opened. That was the moment. Authorities knew it was time to prepare for one of the most unforgettable moments of the entire case. The journey to bring Noah home to his real family after more than 2 decades when hope had seemed lost. With Noah's true identity fully restored and the reunification file completed, authorities entered the most sensitive phase, returning him to the Richardson family after 20. The reunion could not happen abruptly like in movies or media. It had to follow a strict protocol to protect the psychological safety of everyone involved, especially Noah, who had endured prolonged isolation and manipulated perception. NCMEC, working with FBI behavioral specialists, structured the meeting in 3 stages: preparation, approach, and identity confirmation. In the preparation stage, Noah was carefully told who would be waiting for him, the current situation of the Richardson family, and what might happen when they met face-to-face after 23 years. Everything from overwhelming emotion to natural feelings of estrangement as real memories were buried under layers of time. Experts did not pressure Noah to feel anything specific. They simply assured him that every reaction was normal. In the days leading up to the meeting, Noah underwent a full medical checkup, blood tests, nutritional assessment, vision and hearing exams, and brain imaging to rule out biological damage from captivity. Results showed prolonged vitamin deficiencies and chronic stress, but no permanent injury, which greatly relieved the medical team. Psychologically, experts noted mild memory dissociation. Noah could recall scattered childhood images, but sometimes couldn't place them in order, which was entirely consistent with his experience. When shown items recovered from the suspect's home, an old 1977 children's shirt, or a scrap of paper where he had practiced writing "no," Noah froze for a long time. The objects didn't trigger a complete story, but they produced a deeper sense of familiarity than any verbal explanation could. This was a crucial part of the process, giving Noah anchors to reconnect with the life that had been taken from him. On the appointed day, Noah was brought to an NCMEC Victim Support Center in New York that had a room specially reserved for reunions after long-term disappearances. On the other side, Daniel and Emily Richardson had been informed and gone through similar preparation. Psychologists coached them on how to approach without pressuring Noah, how to avoid triggering painful memories, and to let him set the pace of contact in the first moment. They brought old photographs, a few of Noah's favorite childhood toys, and the sweater Emily had knitted for him in 1978, an item she had kept for over 20 years as a reminder that her son was still somewhere in the world. When the door opened, Noah entered slowly, his steps hesitant and slightly trembling. Facing him were 2 people far older than the faint memories he held, his mother's hair more than half gray, his father's face etched with deep lines around the eyes. But the moment their eyes met, a primal sense of recognition rose inside Noah that he couldn't put into words. Daniel stood first, not rushing forward, but stopping a few steps away, eyes red. Emily raised a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob, yet tears streamed down. It took Noah several seconds to realize these faces were not imagined memories, but real people, his actual parents. He tried to speak, but his throat tightened. When his father took one more step and asked in a trembling voice, "Noah, do you remember us?" Fragments of memory buried deep inside suddenly lit up. Laughter in the backyard, a hand guiding him through the garden entrance, a voice calling his name every night. The pieces didn't form a complete story, but they were enough to confirm one undeniable truth: he belonged to them. Finally, Noah stepped forward and let his parents embrace him. It was not the dramatic sobbing hug often seen on television, but a trembling, careful, wordless embrace, as if each of them feared holding too tightly would make the moment disappear. Noah closed his eyes, and for the first time in over 2 decades, he felt he no longer had to carry the name Evan Miller. He was Noah Richardson again, the lost child who had finally found his way home. After the emotional reunion, Noah entered the reintegration support phase, a process no less complex than any part of the investigation. Finding his family was only the beginning. Living again under his true identity after 23 years was an entirely different journey. From the first days living with his parents, Noah experienced a profound internal conflict between 2 versions of himself: Noah Richardson, the child who existed before 1978, and Evan Miller, the identity he had been forced to inhabit for over 2 decades. Whenever someone called him Noah, he responded half a beat late, not because he didn't recognize his real name, but because his body and reflexes, programmed for years, still reacted to the other name. In the first few weeks he occasionally signed documents as Evan without thinking. Those moments caused intense inner turmoil, as if he had to relearn how to be himself. Recognizing this conflict, NCMEC and the psychological team designed a long-term therapy program for Noah that included individual sessions, family therapy, and cognitive adjustment support. His parents also attended therapy because the shock of reunion after 23 years affected them just as deeply. Experts helped them understand that Noah could not instantly become the 7-year-old they lost, and unconscious expectations could place enormous pressure on him. Daniel and Emily had to learn gentle approaches and let Noah set the pace of his new life instead of trying to recreate what was gone. In individual therapy, Noah was encouraged to confront and analyze both sets of memories, real and implanted. He began describing vague childhood images and comparing them to family photos his parents showed him. Some memories brightened with visual cues, others remained distant. The important thing was that Noah gradually felt safe using his real name, revisiting his real life, and accepting that he was no longer controlled. Therapists helped him understand that Evan was not a separate person, but a shell forced upon him. Removing that shell did not erase the past, but allowed him to live proactively. During this time Noah had to relearn basic social skills that most adults take for granted: making phone calls, using real ID, answering questions about family without lying, and simply walking outside in daylight without fear of being discovered. His first walks with his parents left him sweating from anxiety, because for over 20 years he had only been allowed out at night. Yet with his family's patience and professional support, each passing week made the outside world feel less threatening. Early family meals were awkward. Noah didn't know what to say, his parents were afraid to probe too deeply, and silence sometimes lasted minutes. But those silences helped them grow accustomed to each other's presence, without pressure or expectation. Emily began sharing small family stories about old neighbors, about the bedroom they had kept untouched for him. Daniel took Noah to familiar places, not to dredge up pain but to help him feel he belonged. When the new documents bearing Noah Richardson were used for the first time, opening a bank account, applying for a new ID, routine medical visits, Noah felt himself solidly stepping out of the name Evan. No more fear of discovery, no more commanding voice in his head, no more sealed house. Slowly Noah relearned how to live as the person he had lost at age 7. And in that journey of rebuilding a life, the first thing he reclaimed was not memories, but the right to exist as his true self. As Noah began his journey of reintegration into real life, investigators, experts, and the public all faced a larger question beyond his personal story. How could a child disappear in broad daylight from a crowded public place in Queens in 1978 and vanish completely from the legal system for 23 years? Looking back, the initial investigative mistakes became painful lessons. Failure to immediately expand the search to New Jersey, the lack of surveillance technology, underestimating how quickly an abductor could leave the city, and the slow missing person reporting system of the 1970s all contributed to the case going cold. When the NYPD reviewed the file with modern eyes, they acknowledged that an Amber Alert system or today's traffic camera coverage could have found Noah in hours, not decades. In that picture, DNA testing was the era-defining breakthrough. Without the commercial DNA kit Noah happened to take, without automatic matching to NCMEC's database, and without the national database retaining the Richardson's DNA samples from the 1990s, the case might have stayed locked in storage for many more years. DNA put Noah back on the map and reconnected a thread that police and family had despaired of ever finding. Experts described Noah's case as clear proof that genetic technology is not just a crime-solving tool, but a doorway for victims stripped of identity to be found and brought home. Yet even though Noah survived and was reunited, the case still has shadows that cannot be fully explained. Some evidence from the house, an old backpack, scraps of unfinished handwriting, items that don't match the suspect's moving timeline, raised questions about whether Noah was held somewhere else before Pennsylvania, but the suspect could not clearly describe each phase, and his journals only noted vague milestones. The exact route from the garden to New Jersey cannot be perfectly reconstructed, because 1978 roads had no cameras or digital logs. The missing hours right after the abduction remain a question time may never answer. Some investigators believe there was an initial holding location still undiscovered. Others think the suspect's own mental deterioration blurred his ability to provide details. But beyond the unanswered questions, Noah's case is regarded as one of the most powerful examples of the societal importance of finding a victim after more than 2 decades. It confirms that cold cases are never truly dead as long as data exists for comparison, that new technology can re-illuminate cases thought forgotten, that families who suffered without answers can still regain hope. Above all, Noah's story reminds us that behind every missing person file is a real human being with a real life, not just lines on a poster, but a child who might still be alive, waiting for the chance to be found. Ultimately, while society sees Noah as a symbol of extraordinary survival, missing children experts view this as a forceful reminder that no case should ever be considered too old to investigate. Because sometimes all it takes is one small trace, a DNA sample, a data point, a coincidence to shatter decades of darkness and return a person to their real name, real family, and the life that was always there. Noah Richardson's story sounds like a movie, yet it touches on very real issues in America today, and that leaves a few things worth reflecting on. In 1978, a family took their child to the Queen's Botanical Garden, a public, daytime, crowded, family-friendly place, yet in the single moment, the father turned to look at a map. Noah slipped from sight and was led away by a man who looked ordinary and then disappeared for. That reminds today's parents that crowded, beautiful, family-oriented does not equal completely safe. Children need to be taught very specifically, never follow a stranger even if they say they know mommy or daddy, never take candy, never leave the designated area. These are survival skills, not raising kids in fear. The fact that Noah was fed false memories, extreme homeschooled, and completely cut off from neighbors and school, also sounds a warning. In the U.S., parents have the right to homeschool, but if a child becomes completely invisible to every system, no school, no doctor, no records, society has almost no way to notice something wrong. The existence of NCMEC and DNA databases, how Noah randomly took a test kit and was matched to a missing child file, shows technology can only help when we leave footprints, regular doctor visits, updated paperwork, consistent photos of kids, careful record keep. And finally, the fact that the Richardson family never gave up, submitted DNA, kept Noah's room intact for 23 years, reminds us that even in seemingly hopeless loss, there are things we can actively do. Document, report, persistently update authorities. Hope is fragile, but when tied to concrete action, sometimes miracles become explainable. Thank you for joining us on Noah Richardson's story of incredible resilience. If you found it meaningful, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring decades-old cases that finally get solved. See you in the next video, where every story carries a real-life lesson and a new reason for hope.